Welcome to Meeting the Inconceivable, a podcast exploring Zen koans, dreams, and the creative life produced by Pacific Zen Institute. Pacific Zen has a legacy of preserving and reimagining the koan tradition to meet our own times. With a lively community of artists, innovators, and seekers of all kinds that extends worldwide, our mission is to create a culture of transformation through meditation, koans, the arts, and conversations about the deepest matters. In this episode, Roshi Tess Beasley tells the story of Juzhi from the Gateless Gate collection. A solitary mountain monk, Juzhi was visited one day by a traveling nun by the name of True World. When he asked her to stay for tea, she challenged him, saying, "Say a true word of Zen, and I'll stay." But Juzhi went blank. He asked her once more, but she posed the same offer, and again he could make no reply. That night he vowed to leave his temple and the practice, but he fell asleep on his luggage and awoke to the spirit of the mountain as if in a dream. Beasley devotes the rest of the talk to exploring Juzhi's sudden awakening as the mountain helped him to understand the nature of one true word. It's sort of funny how many technology gremlins we've had this time. We've been having quite a few laughs about it behind the scenes because it seems like in whatever session, this is one of my very favorite things to sort of pay attention to, is there are certain patterns and strange things that are talking to each other. Like John was talking about the mycelium last night, that then crop up like little mushrooms. And one of the ways it seems to be cropping up this time is in these little gremlins that mute us or unmute us or create strange feedback, almost like the voices of little gremlins. I thought I'd start this morning by telling you about a little joke that goes on in my house, which is, I don't know if any of you use this particular product. It's called Resolve. It's very useful, actually. But a while ago, we were sitting, and it happened to be on the table somewhere. I was sitting with my partner, and all of a sudden, she kind of looks over and says, "Resolve what?" And it has, this one seems actually pretty nice relative to the previous model. But the previous model had this very imposing red little spigot spout here and these giant letters that just say resolve. And so we kind of got laughing about this idea of like, resolve what? What exactly are you offering me here, little bottle? But something I've been thinking about a lot this retreat, I was noticing it this morning. I went out for a long walk here, and just how incredibly seductive problems are. Like this couple was walking along opposite me, and I heard her say to him, "And then she took the kids off to Mexico." And I kind of thought inside myself, well, yeah, how dare she? Like, what's going on with this person? And all of a sudden, I'm kind of hooked into this, I don't know this situation. And then I'm walking along a little further. It's a nice morning. It's really quiet, other than the birds and occasional kind of little fishing boat paddling by. And this woman's doing yoga out on her porch, and she's got like pop music blaring. And, if I'd had my little bottle, I just would have kind of I had such a reaction. And then I thought, do I actually really care about this? Well, no, I don't. Like, I don't know her circumstances. I don't know what's going on. But that impulse just to is so strong. And it's kind of funny, too, because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently. Each time we'd start the conversation, she would say about 2 minutes into it, "Well, wait, what was my problem again?" And I'd start to laugh, and she'd say, wait, wait, wait. No, it was important. What was it? And we'd remember what it was. Okay, yeah. Then we'd start talking. About 2 minutes later, she'd say, wait, what was my problem again? And this went on. But it's true. I've also been thinking a lot about what John was talking about last night, that somehow there are these little things that you hope that you just have enough of this stuff like lying around that you can take care of. But there are these bigger things where, my heart is somehow not at rest, or there's something I feel like I'm carrying, or that's somehow unresolved in my heart, in my life. And I was also thinking about how interesting it is, as we've been talking about the Blue Cliff record, how much stuff around ancestry keeps cropping up. And how that's one of those interesting patterns that just goes along with the territory, because it's this massive collection of hearts that aren't at rest, and of questions, and of stories. And they're questions we still carry with us. They're enduring human, unresolvable, unsprayable questions. And Carl Jung used to call it opening the mouth of the dead. And that both their journeys and what they discovered and their pains and struggles come alive for us each time we sort of sit down with them, or sometimes each time we dream about them, or we see an old photograph, or we open up an old book. And a lot of those questions, I think, have to do with, who am I, and am I living the right life? Or should I somehow, cut bait and try being someone else? Or what am I to do from here? And so the story I want to tell you about this morning was a guy who sort of ended up in a lot of these questions. And he lived right around the same time as the great Linji that John was talking about last night, which was a very tumultuous, difficult, strange time toward the end of the first millennium in China. And being a Buddhist wasn't necessarily the first option you might choose, because temples and shrines were all being destroyed. The government was being overthrown. Buddhism wasn't necessarily in favor. And the people who had really come into it in a deep and sincere way would find their way either into cities and sort of practice the sly person's way, or would find their way out to a hermitage somewhere. And that's what this guy did. He found a hermitage somewhere in the mountains. And he's going along practicing pretty well. And doesn't really have a teacher and doesn't interact with too many other folks, but he's got a nice place and he's got a dedicated practice and he's making his way. And one afternoon, as he's sitting in deep meditation, a nun comes along and she enters his hermitage and she walks around him 3 times. She has this hat on. She stands in front of him and she says, if you can say a true word of Zen, if you can say a turning word, I'll take off my hat and I'll stay. And sort of like John was saying about poor Yun Men last night, he choked. He doesn't know what to say to her. And she walks around him again. You can say one true word of Zen, I'll take off my hat and I'll stay. He really wants her to stay, but nothing will come out of him. He freezes. And so she goes to leave and he says, it's almost dark. Won't you please just take off your hat and stay. Never mind that I can't quite answer your question. And she says, if you say one true word of Zen, if you say a turning word, I'll take off my hat and I'll stay. And he can't do it. And so she walks off into the night. And as happens, I think, when we've had any kind of encounter like this, it sends him into a bit of a spin. And he realizes he just maybe he doesn't have any idea what he's doing. And he says, I have a man's body, but not a heroic spirit. He's really being hard on himself. And he says, in the morning, I'm going to go find myself a teacher. And I think this is what happens. Usually either we blame the other person, like, I can't believe, I tried, come on. She didn't have to be so harsh. Or we somehow turn it in on ourselves. But the nun's name was True World, which seems very appropriate because all she did was really reveal to him some way that he wasn't free. She just held up a mirror. And so he makes this resolve that he's going to go find a teacher and sort of, man up, get on the real path. But thankfully, some greater force overtakes him as he's packing, and he just gets incredibly tired. And he falls asleep on his luggage. And thankfully, we have these greater forces sometimes that seem to step in when we're about to get in our own way. And as he's dead asleep, the mountain god, the spirit of the mountain, comes down and wakes him up and says, don't leave. There's a true flesh and blood bodhisattva teacher who's coming for you. And Juzhi is this guy's name. He kind of thinks, well, all right. So the next morning he unpacks and he settles in. He's still not quite sure what he's doing. But sure enough, a couple days later, a teacher shows up named Tianlang. And Juzhi recounts to him the whole story of what happened and how he kind of choked in the face of True World. And all this other teacher does is just hold up one finger for him. And suddenly Juzhi has an incredible awakening. And part of where that comes from is he realizes it wasn't that he was trying to reach into himself for something that wasn't there. There was an invitation taking place that he could enter. And True World walked around him and faced him, and something in him wasn't free to respond. But he hadn't considered all the possible options. He may not have even had to say anything. And so this became, for him, emblematic of the encounter, what it is to encounter another being, what it is to encounter the vastness of life. And what's so interesting, you can just even look at your finger now. You can imagine sitting in front of a teacher, or sitting in front of a friend, or sitting in anything that you might ask them. Just imagine this is what you get. And that anything in the world could actually arise in response to this because it's coming from you. There was a school I used to do some work with called the Diamond Approach. And one of the things that they would do is you would sit with another person, and for, say, 15 minutes, they would just ask you the same question over and over and over again. And what you realize after a while is you have to get down past your usual responses to things. And sometimes this would make people incredibly upset because they couldn't meet what might be coming out of them. It was difficult to get past their conditioned responses and their usual story about themselves. And sometimes they would get extremely angry at the person asking the question, or the person who designed this exercise, or that they had even come to the retreat, or they would feel despair, or they would feel delight, or you can see anything can happen in response to this one invitation of connection. I talked about these questions that we carry around with us. You might sit down with Judy and say, am I living the right life? Am I a good person? What is the way? You just meet what arises in the encounter. And the Blue Cliff record is full of incredibly interesting questions. What is the first principle of the holy teaching? Or what is the way? Ordinary mind is the way. Well, should I turn toward it or not? If you turn toward it, you turn away from it. What? Wait a second. That's not fair. You can't do that. Sure you can. Part of it's the question, but so much of it in this practice is actually the willingness and the openness to meet the encounter that's on offer. The what's coming into being between whatever I think I am, whatever I think is in front of me. And, having a good question can help. But if you think it's about the answer, you probably won't get very far before you have to contend with some other part of what it means to be here, what it means to engage. I guess the thing that's really interesting about Juzhi is that this became his teaching, it became his practice for his entire life. And even when he died on his deathbed, he said to someone, this one finger Zen that was offered to me by Tianlong has been my whole life, but I've never used it up. Do you understand? And then as legend goes, he held up one finger and he died. And what's interesting, I think, especially in light of what we've been talking about this retreat, is that it's a profound lack of clarity that opens an encounter. Whatever it might be, even for him, even each time he held up that one finger, he has no idea what's going to happen. He has no idea what it might mean, what might come to be. But it's the willingness, it's almost a marker of a willingness to invite the encounter. And another part of his story is that, as he got students, there was a young boy who decided, well, this one finger thing seems to be working pretty well. Maybe I'll give it a try. And word gets back to Juzhi that this little guy is going around, answering people. And so Juzhi comes up to him and says, I heard you've been figuring out the dharma. I heard you've got something going on. Will you show me? And so the little boy, and as legend has it, he cut off his finger. And the little boy, screams and goes running out of the room. And just before he's about to leave, Juzhi calls his name and he turns around and Juzhi does this. And the boy has this great awakening. If you should get over the sometimes violence of these early Zen stories, the fabled violence anyway, it's like, it's true that you can't, the way the dharma comes to you, however it comes to you, you can't fake it. You can't carry it around. You can't make it up. You can't even really hold on to it. But as Michelle was saying this morning, it's for you. It comes to you. It comes in your way and it comes out of you. And there's this listening and continual, that inexhaustible thing of just responding to what it is, allowing it into being, maybe over and over and over in a fresh way. And there's an interesting tension in this practice, you've probably noticed, between words and no words. And it's said to be a practice beyond words and letters, but you see how words can arise inside the occasion and they're part of this. And they can also be sort of pasted on an occasion, in which case they're more like the little boy. And it becomes part of welcoming the encounter, I think, over and over, to really feel each time something's coming out of you, each time your experience is coming into being. What is it? What is this that's happening? What is it this time? Without knowing. And I thought I'd tell you a couple little stories about a couple encounters in my own universe, in my own life. Many years ago, I had the chance to do what people are calling horse whispering, which is you go in a round pen with a horse, and there's absolutely no prescription of what should happen. And this way, I think it's a little bit like Dokusan. You encounter this other being, and really the only rules that exist are the ones you bring in with you, which you immediately usually learn what those are. You learn your expectations, you learn your fears, you learn the ways that you're not free. You learn the moves that you don't have or that are really uncomfortable for you. And what's great is that horses really don't care at all about your ideas about yourself or the encounter or them or your explanations or anything. They're just kind of, And so I did one retreat one time, and the first encounter I had was with a mule, actually, who was beautiful and had these incredibly long ears. And true to being a mule, was really not at all motivated to do anything at all. And she was very nice about it. She was very sweet, but it was clear that if I wanted anything to happen while I was standing in there, I was going to kind of have to get the party started. And I learned immediately how afraid I was to be, rude or aggressive, because the person sort of coaching this interaction said, well, just, do something. Well, like what? So I go up and pet her nose and kind of give her a pat and, and she's perfectly amiable, but nothing's happening. And she starts even kind of pushing in on me a little bit. And the person said, well, do you want her to do that? Well, no, not necessarily. But okay, well, why don't you do something? Well, but I don't want her to be afraid of me and I don't want her to be upset and whatever. And finally, we'll try something. So I, ha! And she kind of startled and immediately sort of jumped into action. And we had a completely different relationship start to happen. And she pretty quickly went back to being kind of stubborn. But each time I had to kind of draw on some key inside myself to get it going and realize all of my ideas about being aggressive or about being rude did not apply to this situation, even a little bit, even at all. But they were creating for me a lot of anxiety. And it was a really interesting, so much of what they talk about in Chan, especially in the early Chan, is can you accord with the situation? Can you actually listen to what the situation is asking for? Not whatever my ideas are. And so I ended up having a good time with this mule. I mean, I wouldn't say she was bucking and kicking and, we weren't, we had an all right time. And the next encounter I had after that one was this little pony who is a very feisty little critter and was happy to engage, but was engaging quite aggressively. And so he would start to kind of charge you and run around the rink and sort of kick, and he'd very easily veer into my space. And I immediately had to make myself kind of bigger, but also more playful. He wanted to play. And so this time I had a little lead rope. And so I completely had to work with my fear of him. I had to work with my fear of myself. I had to work with my fear of doing it wrong. And in the end, the more I could drop about whatever I thought was supposed to be happening, we had an incredibly fun time. He was a total little shit, but he was really fun. And so the nature of this, whatever this circle is, wherever we meet something, whether it's a tree or a chipmunk or a baby bunny or an angry person, it's always holding up that mirror to how can I truly respond to this situation freely. And also, I guess the last thing to say maybe is, can I allow all these moves without learning to depend on them? That's what happened with the little boy, right? He started to depend on this for everything. And it was the teaching of Juzhi to actually take that away from him in some way, to realize, no, it's not for you. This is not how the dharma comes to you. You can't depend on however you think it might be alive in me. And so I'm going to read you maybe just a couple poems about the nature of the encounter. First one's called Encounter, which is helpful. This is by Milosh. We were riding through frozen fields in a wagon at dawn. A red wing rose in the darkness, and suddenly a hare ran across the road. One of us pointed to it with his hand. That was long ago. Today, neither of them is alive, not the hare nor the man who made the gesture. Oh, my love, where are they? Where are they going? The flash of a hand, streak of movement, rustle of pebble. I ask not out of sorrow, but in wonder. This is the thing about a real encounter. It creates some wonder. What's actually happening here? Who is it happening to? This one's called The Heart of Heracles. Lying under the stars in the summer night, late while the autumn constellations climb the sky, as the cluster of Hercules falls down the west, I put the telescope by and watched Deneb move toward the zenith. My body is asleep. Only my eyes and brain are awake. The stars stand around me like gold eyes. I can no longer tell where I begin and leave off. The faint breeze in the dark pines and the invisible grass, the tipping earth, the swarming stars have an eye that sees itself. So this is kind of the eye that sees itself, that sees you, whatever you are. I think that may be all I have to say for the moment. Would anyone like to ask a question and make a comment? Enter the horse rink.
This is kind of frightening for me. Not because I don't want to say anything, but because I come from, well, I was used to a way of seeing things where the less you spoke, the better it was. And whenever anything came out of my heart and mind, it didn't quite make friends with. And so I'm quickly realizing how that wasn't right for me, and that encountering this right here has been such a freeing experience. And uh, I could say that I'm encountering all the moments that I was creating all along for the past year with my art. It's actually coming alive with all of you, and it's such a good feeling. So to to open your heart and to speak from that place, there's nothing better than that, because you feel like, not only the whole universe is with you, but you encounter that firsthand. And so I'm noticing that with you, with you and you and you. So thank you.
Thank you. I think you make a beautiful point in, yeah, what it is to find our own sense of that, whatever it is. And for some people, it might be that they're actually much more quiet than they thought they had to be. And for other people, they learn to let something out. And it really is sort of that little jade thing about we can only know it for ourselves. We know when we're in accord with things, we can feel it. So, yeah, thank you. It's nice to feel you. Carla.
Yeah, I like that koan about the woman that walks around the man 3 times, and I had a book that I'd never really looked at, and I encountered that koan, and I thought, it's called Women of the Way, and so I looked in that book to see if, this woman that was in the koan was in there, and she was. And it told a little bit more about her and, her wisdom and why she went there and, what she did. And I can't remember offhand exactly what they said about her, but I did find her in there. And they said something kind of funny about the guy that, had the awakening with the one finger. They said, well, that was lucky for him because he couldn't think of anything to say. And no, he didn't have to say anything. He just could hold up one finger. So I thought that was pretty amusing. And something, in response to what Sylvia said, I've had, trouble kind of expressing myself or talking to people I didn't know. But in fact, it's kind of a cultural thing with my nationality. And my mother had this saying. She said, better to keep your mouth closed and let people think you are a fool than to open it and remove all doubt. So, which is funny but kind of, weird. And then lastly, I had an encounter with a neighbor today. I was walking down the street back from the gym, and a woman greeted me, and she was very happy to see me. And we had some rain last week, and they were supposed to get rain next week, so we were all happy about the rain and stuff like that. And she looks across the street and she says, well, what about that? And I said, there's cars there and on a little street that no one can drive on. And she says, no, not the cars, the pigeons. And people are bothered by pigeons here. And I said, well, my husband put chicken wire on the house so they wouldn't roost there, and that seemed to work. And she goes, oh, I know whose cars those are, and one of them is my next door neighbor. They're gone, and they wanted to park their car there so no one would, see it in the driveway, and the other one she knew belonged to the other guy. So, I mean, I had no idea what she wanted to say, but I was happy to talk to her, and she was happy to talk to me. So, meet what comes.
That's a really interesting point, actually, about two things you said I want to pick up on. The first is I thought about that too with this whole, this was sort of his way out of not picking and choosing. Like maybe he got off easy, but I think I also sort of was thinking about, what it must have been like to hold that for your whole life. And that, maybe there was like a rebranding crisis at one point. Like, is this still working for people? Should I still, that like there was a deep thing for him in some way, that there was nothing beyond the scope of that experience and somehow what he was able to transmit out of it. But the other thing you said, Carla, that's interesting is how often we actually don't know what to say to people, even though we might want to connect, and how all these strange little things that aren't bad whatsoever, pigeons and cars parked and all the become some way of attempting an encounter. And one of the things I'm really interested in is what allows it to go down past that? What allows us to really feel just for a minute? What's it like to be with this person? Or is there something here that wants to come into the conversation? And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. But pigeons and parked cars, I think, is as good as anything for a Saturday morning.
Oh, I think it was complete in every way. So it didn't need anything else.
Thank you. Amanda.
I'm feeling really super nervous to share because what I want to say is just completely unformed in my mind. But really, I just wanted to thank you, Tess, for your talk, because it just filled me with such a sense of wonder, and I just keep on being so floored by, I don't know, I've been involved in some other approaches to meditation in other schools, and here I just keep feeling like, oh my god, I can't believe how wild this is. It's so wild, and it's just like nothing I've ever met, and I just can't believe that I had to be here. And there was something about your talk, Tess, that just really let that slap me in the face again. Just it's just so much more big and vast than anything that I could imagine. And so I'm just feeling so moved. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tess.
I think a lot of people here feel that way, including me. I was noticing when Allison did her color thing the other day, and we were watching each person's color and kind of the wild vastness that was just coming into being with each little square. Yeah, we get to be here and do this. Thanks. Andrew.
Wanted to, well, an encounter came to mind during your talk from the other day. I was heading down the alley here, going out for a walk, and just got down to the end by the last house, and there was this kind of thud and scratch noise right down by my foot. And I looked, and there was this rabbit, this little light brown rabbit with a big, round, brown, deep brown eye. So we locked eyes for a moment, and then it scurried off. And that had never happened before. Usually the encounter is the rabbit's doing its best to hide. I see it at a distance. I want it to stay so I can see it longer, and it shoots off. But here it was way too close, and I didn't see it. And it's almost like it was saying, you're supposed to see me. So it made a noise. So I'd look at it, and then it could run off. It's like it forgot how to rabbit until I looked at it. And it's like, oh, great, we've had the encounter. Now I can rabbit away and you go on your way. And it was great to be in that space of a moment where it was like we each had to got the opportunity to remind each other who we were and how this works. But in that moment, before we knew that, it was just this wondrous, what's this? What's this? And that big, deep brown eye sticks with me. And it felt like being seen and opening a portal to see. So that came up as you were speaking, and I just wanted to share it.
Thank you. I really love that. It forgot how to rabbit for a moment. Like, I don't know. It's nice when I completely forget how to test, or when I forget how to human, and then, oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, that wonder is pretty nice. Thank you. Serena.
I'm really moved too, and I think I'm going to be a little incoherent myself. It's getting to that point in the retreat where all the koans become the same koan for me, and they all mean the same thing. And it's a freakish heat wave here in Portland, and it's getting up to 106 today, and then it's going to be 115 tomorrow and the next day. And there's a fire already in the Warm Springs Reservation, 2 fires there actually. And I found myself this morning just walking among the trees, and I was wishing them good luck. And I get to go back to my air conditioning, but they're out there in this crazy heat. But the no picking and choosing was with me, and the mind I have is always like, well, should I have moved to Portland because now it's burning too, and I moved from California, and should I go back? And it's always kind of deserting myself in that way, like not being with me. But I'm with me now, and other people like Carla were talking about how it recently rained where they are, and somehow that rain is Portland's rain, like that one. It's all one, and I just like felt the rain and started crying.
Yeah. For some reason, when you were talking, the other thing that made me think of was the god of the mountain, and somehow the teacher that showed up 2 days later, and even the nun that, even though, Juzhi is sort of trying to figure out if he's in the right place and what the hell he's doing, and that there are these other things at work that are kind of guiding him despite his best, sort of thing, and end up opening him out to the larger world in some way. And I think that wherever that place is, that the land where all the koans melt together, seems like it's the place those little beings come out of when we rest into that, like the rain. Yeah. Thanks. Amaryllis.
Thanks, Tess. When you were talking about the working with the mule and the pony, it just reminded me of teaching people violin lessons, especially children. Teachers always, in the past that I've known, they had lots of ideas, they had methods and all that. And when I taught in Germany, it was interesting because most of the kids would respond in a pretty obedient way, so to say. But teaching here, especially in Colorado, it's like I'm encountering the pony, or sometimes the opposite extreme of the mule, trying to get a rise out of something. How can I do this? Or the student wants to lie on the floor and kick their legs around or something. Oh, how can I do this? And it's just fascinating. And maybe at first I felt it pretty exhausting and stressful. And more it's like playing a game with them. We're playing. And the more they know that, the more we can start to get on the same wavelength, so to speak. And it's fun for all of us. So just to say.
That's an amazing example. And I think it's funny how much we forget that like things can be playful. I notice how much like even on Zoom meetings, it's like, oh, well, we're on Zoom, so we better like not chit chat because we can actually have like a meeting or something that's like, well, I don't know, why not? You know, it's always, yeah, always breaking whatever forms we thought were holding us. That seems to be the spirit of it. And I don't know, I wish I were a kid sometimes who could teach me violin, Amaryllis.
It's that something is happening underneath the words, even underneath the actions, that is connecting us. And that connection is wonderful.
Yes. Thank you. I think there was Alani.
Thank you, Tess. That was wonderful. Yeah, I was thinking about being Judy and the reactions that he must have gotten, all the different reactions, and how that really, like you said, it really is a holding up a mirror, because, and it would be a mirror that I could see myself in, and also that he could see me in. And I'm sort of loving it because I thought, what a great opportunity to see yourself in action. You know, there can be, I'm thinking of encounters that were unexpected and not pleasant. For example, one time, I've talked about this before, but I was at an intersection and I was feeling very, blissful and happy that day about everything in the world. And there was a guy, it was a 4-way stop, and he came to the right of me. And so we both arrived at the same time. So I sort of said, oh, please be my guest. Go ahead. I was feeling very sort of zen. And he went across the intersection and did this at me. He gave me the double bird with this really, really angry face. And I thought, and I was so taken aback. And my reaction, I was reeling and hurting and upset about it for weeks, thinking, why did he do that to me? And the world is not a safe place. And I'm so injured and I'm so hurt. And it wasn't until about 2 weeks later that I realized how extremely funny the whole thing was, and how it had absolutely nothing to do with me, but myself leapt into action and into despair and into wanting to go and live in a cave. And so I just think that, as you said, there's just such freshness, there's such opportunity with every encounter. Just sort of to have transparency, and I just I love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lani. And yeah, to see how, for some reason, you can think of what he cut me off or something, and I was so ready to be upset. And he turned back and he did something like this, and then he blew me a kiss because he clearly had just met and it was so disarming because it was just, and then I just I loved him. I wasn't mad about it after that, but it was just like the willingness to dance instead of feel bad or angry or something was like very all possible moves considered. Yeah. Thank you. I'll do Kristen and then maybe we'll call it. Kristen, tell us something.
So I just wanted to respond to, the piece where you were talking about the interactions with the mule and the horse, and then what Amaryllis and Lonnie both were talking about, the meeting without the words. And I find that here I am trying to say it in words, how hard it is to sometimes, how much words get in the way. And that is what working with animals has taught me so much, that it's like we're like blah 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 blah, and they're saying all this stuff, but we're too busy blah blah blahing. And I find that when I go to interact with humans, sometimes the words just get so in the way. And if you can just sit together, I mean, and it's almost impossible to do. But if you can read body language and all of that, there's so much more to an encounter than just, and that's what's so touching about this, is that it's beyond all that verbiage that is that human thing, and that the rest of the world is communicating without all that verbiage. I don't know. It's just an interesting thing, and I highly recommend really listening to your animals and the rabbit, and just the beings, the trees and the bees that aren't blah blah blahing as I blah blah blah.
I think it's an interesting thing of like, are we actually connected to what we're saying? Because that it almost what you're saying almost makes me think of music, how there's the silence that allows for some part, and then there are the notes that allow for some part. But if you just bang on the keys all the time and there's no silence and there's no sort of listening or connection to what's happening, then yeah, the meaning gets lost very quickly. But if the meaning arises through the words as part of the interaction, there's a different thing. It's more free. I think you made me think of one last, there's a Yan Wu, we've been reading a lot of Yan Wu's commentary, and I thought I'd just share this with you as a closing thing. He says of this case, which is number 19, raise one speck of dust and it contains the whole earth. When a single flower blooms, the world arises. But how will you see them before the speck of dust is raised, before the flower opens? And it's that whole thing of, you want to get it before the words come or before the action comes, but it arises as it's happening. To support these episodes or learn more about upcoming programs and retreats at Pacific Zen Institute, visit us at pacificzen.org. You'll find details on John Tarrant's Sunday talks, our Open Temple morning meditation, and our Zen Luminary series featuring intimate conversations with scholars, poets, and teachers of Koan Zen. Thanks for listening.